You smell the limestone before you see it, damp, ancient, mixed with something metallic that makes your throat tighten. The lamplight doesn't quite reach the corners of this underground chamber, but you can feel other people breathing in the darkness around you. Your wrists burn where the silk cord cuts in, and you realize with strange detachment that silk was chosen because it leaves no marks on skin that will soon be inspected by men who understand value the way merchants understand grain. Then the footsteps begin, measured and deliberate, and you understand that whatever comes next has happened before, many times, with perfect efficiency. Damascus, Syria, September 14th, 1260. Catherine of Acre kneels on stone that gleams wet in the lamplight. She is 23 years old, daughter of a Frankish merchant who believed his trading contracts would protect his family when the Mamluk armies arrived 3 months earlier. She was wrong about many things, but mostly about what survival would cost. 17 other women line the chamber walls, ages 14 to 42, all Christian, all captured during the same methodical campaign that swept through Crusader territories like a surgeon's blade, precise and utterly without mercy. 3 doors break the limestone walls. Each leads somewhere different. The women don't yet know where, but they've learned enough in 90 days of captivity to recognize that the Mamluks approach human acquisition with the same systematic genius they apply to military conquest. Before we go any further, I genuinely want to know where you're watching this from. Drop your location in the comments. It amazes me every single time that a story from 7 centuries ago can reach every corner of our world today. Now, understand something crucial about what's about to unfold. This isn't random brutality. This isn't the chaos of conquest. What the Mamluks built was something far more disturbing, an infrastructure of transformation, documented procedures refined over decades, turning human beings into precisely calibrated instruments of state power. And they kept records, detailed, systematic, bureaucratic records that most histories prefer to bury. The man who enters through the center door carries no weapon. He wears the simple robes of a royal steward, but the deference shown by armed guards reveals his true authority. Amir Tash Tamur. His official title translates roughly as Director of Integration for Acquired Populations. Integration. That's the word used in administrative documents. The reality contains calculations that would take hours to fully comprehend. Layers upon layers of economic, political, and social engineering applied to human flesh. He walks past Catherine without a glance. Stops in front of a younger woman, 16 perhaps, with the distinctive features marking her as Armenian rather than Frankish. He speaks to her in Arabic. She doesn't understand. He repeats himself in Armenian. Her face drains of color. She shakes her head, frantic, pleading. He nods once. A guard takes her arm, leads her toward the left door. It opens. Through it, Catherine glimpses a courtyard where dozens of women sit in perfect rows, heads bowed, while men in official robes examine them with the practiced efficiency of livestock merchants evaluating breeding stock. The door closes. Tash Tamur continues down the line. His selections follow patterns that become clear as Catherine watches. Age matters. Origin matters. Physical condition matters most of all. But there's something else he's measuring. Something less tangible that reveals itself in the questions he asks each woman in her native tongue. The questions vary, but the underlying test remains constant. He's measuring their capacity for transformation. Here's what you need to understand about the Mamluks. They built an empire on transformation. Every sultan, every emir, every commander who shaped the medieval Middle East began life as a slave. Young boys, captured from Turkic tribes in Central Asia or Circassian communities in the Caucasus, were purchased by Egyptian and Syrian rulers and subjected to intensive military and religious training that stripped away everything they'd been and rebuilt them as something entirely new. By their 20s, these former slaves had become elite warriors. By their 30s, many held positions of command. And when the Ayyubid dynasty collapsed in 1250, it was a Mamluk who seized the throne. This created a paradox at the core of their society. The ruling class consisted entirely of men who had been enslaved, broken, and systematically remade. They didn't view transformation through bondage as atrocity. They viewed it as proven methodology. If boys could be converted into the most formidable military force of their era, then surely captured populations could be converted into whatever the state required. And the state required much. At its height, the Mamluk Sultanate controlled Egypt, Syria, Palestine, and Western Arabia. It defended Islam against Mongol invasion from the east and Crusader encroachment from the west. It managed the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. It dominated Mediterranean trade routes. This vast apparatus demanded constant replenishment of human resources at every level: soldiers, servants, artisans, laborers, concubines. The systematic acquisition and processing of captured peoples became as essential to Mamluk survival as tax collection or grain storage. The infrastructure they built would impress modern logisticians. Damascus alone contained 7 major processing centers by the late 13th century. Not prisons. Transformation facilities, each designed for specific categories of captives. The Citadel complex where Catherine waited held high-value acquisitions, individuals whose background, education, or physical attributes marked them for specialized placement. Other facilities handled volume processing, converting thousands of war captives into the labor force that built roads, maintained irrigation systems, and staffed growing cities. The system operated with documented efficiency: medical examination within 24 hours of arrival, classification based on age, origin, physical condition, and assessed capability, assignment to transformation track, initial processing period of 60 to 90 days, final placement. Records tracked each individual through the system. Losses were calculated. Productivity was measured. The Mamluks approached human acquisition with the same systematic thinking they applied to military campaigns. But women presented unique considerations. Male captives offered straightforward utility: labor, military service for those deemed suitable, craft work for those with skills. The pathways were clear. Women required more complex calculation. Their value derived from multiple functions simultaneously: reproductive capacity, domestic service, status signaling, economic exchange. And something else, something that records document but modern sensibilities struggle to process without flinching: cultural erasure as demonstration of conquest. When Mamluk armies took Christian territories, they weren't simply acquiring land. They were eliminating rival power structures. Christian communities in Syria, Palestine, and Armenia had maintained distinct identities for centuries. They had their own churches, their own laws, their own marriage customs. They represented alternative sources of loyalty, potential resistance, future rebellion. The systematic integration of their women into Mamluk households served multiple purposes simultaneously. It removed the next generation of Christians from the population. It demonstrated total victory. It provided tangible reward to soldiers and officers. It generated revenue through slave markets. And it destroyed community cohesion more effectively than any massacre. This was policy, not chaos. Administrative documents from the period reveal the calculation behind it. Regulations governed the distribution of captives. Officers received first selection based on rank. Common soldiers received assigned shares. The state claimed 1/5 of all acquisitions. Local governors could purchase captives at fixed rates. Markets handled surplus. The entire system operated under legal frameworks derived from interpretations of Islamic law regarding prisoners of war and slavery. The women caught in this system faced transformation procedures refined over decades of practice. The Mamluks had learned from experience what methods worked: how to break resistance without destroying utility, how to erase previous identity while building new compliance, how to maximize economic return while maintaining social control. They had developed techniques that combined psychological manipulation with physical constraint, always calculated to achieve specific outcomes. Catherine of Acre, kneeling on wet stone, was about to experience the culmination of this systematic thinking. When Taj Timur stopped in front of her, he asked his question in Frankish French. His accent was perfect. This detail matters. The Mamluks didn't merely conquer, they studied. They learned the languages of their enemies, understood Christian social structures well enough to exploit them with precision. "Can you read?" Catherine hesitated. In that moment, she made a decision that would determine everything that followed. She could lie, claim ignorance, hope that illiteracy might make her less valuable, might lead to assignment to some less terrible fate than whatever awaited educated captives. But something in Taj Timur's eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Her father had been a merchant. Merchants taught their children to read. Lying would only demonstrate poor judgment. "Yes," she said, "French and Latin, some Arabic." Taj Timur's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He gestured to a guard who brought a wooden tablet covered in wax. Someone had written a sentence in Arabic script. Taj Timur held it toward Catherine. "Read this." She studied the words. The script was formal, classical, a line from religious poetry. She read it aloud, slowly, her pronunciation uncertain but comprehensible. Taj Timur took the tablet back, made a mark on the parchment he carried, moved to the next woman without another word. Catherine didn't know it yet, but she'd just been selected for the right door. Not the left, which led to the processing courtyard and eventual distribution to military households as domestic servants. Not the center, which led to immediate sale in the Damascus slave market. The right door led to something else entirely, a transformation track reserved for captives who possessed education, linguistic ability, or other skills that made them suitable for placement in administrative households. This sounds almost merciful until you understand what administrative household placement actually meant. 3 days later, Catherine was taken through that right door. She found herself in a different chamber, smaller, its walls covered with carpets that muffled sound. 5 other women waited there, all selected by the same criteria: educated, multilingual, young enough to be malleable. An older woman entered. Her name was Sophia. Once she'd been exactly where Catherine now stood. 20 years earlier, captured during a different campaign, processed through a different facility, but the same system. She'd been Armenian nobility. Now she spoke Arabic with the fluency of a native, dressed in the style of Mamluk court women, and her role was to oversee the transformation of captives like Catherine into something useful. "You will forget your name," Sophia said in French, then repeated it in Arabic, Latin, and Armenian, so all 6 women understood. "You will forget your father's house. You will forget your God, your prayers, your saints. You will forget everything that made you what you were. This isn't cruelty. This is necessity. The woman you were has no value here. The woman you'll become has considerable value. The transition will be difficult. Most resist. All eventually comply. The question isn't whether you'll transform. The question is how much suffering you'll endure before accepting the inevitable." She paused, letting the words settle, then continued with something that sounded almost like compassion. "I'm going to teach you how to survive, not by resisting, that only prolongs agony, but by understanding the rules of this new world and learning to navigate them. You've been selected because you're capable of more than servitude. You can read, write, manage households, educate children. In Mamluk society, women with such skills occupy positions of considerable influence within domestic spheres. You'll never be free. But you can be valued, you can be protected, you can live in comfort rather than degradation. The choice, and it is a choice however limited, is whether you'll fight uselessly against transformation or direct your intelligence toward surviving it with some measure of dignity and tact. The transformation process Sophia described unfolded over 6 months. It began with isolation, complete severing from other captives, from familiar language, from any reminder of previous life. Catherine and the 5 others were separated into individual cells, small but not uncomfortable, where they heard only Arabic spoken by the servants who brought food and water. 3 times daily, they attended instruction sessions where Sophia and other women, all former captives themselves, taught them the intricate protocols of Mamluk household management. But the real transformation wasn't linguistic or practical. It was psychological. The Mamluks had learned that broken people were useless. They needed compliance, not destruction. So they built transformation procedures around a calculated mixture of isolation, reward, punishment, and, most effectively, the gradual erosion of hope for any alternative. Catherine learned that resistance brought not violence but withdrawal of privileges that had seemed meaningless until removed. A lamp to read by. A second blanket. Conversation. The ability to bathe in warm water rather than cold. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that left marks. Just a systematic reduction in quality of life that made clear the correlation between compliance and comfort. She learned that the questions Sophia asked during daily sessions weren't merely about memorizing Arabic vocabulary or household protocols. They were about measuring her internal adaptation. "What did you eat for breakfast as a child?" Sophia would ask. If Catherine answered in French, instruction ended for the day. If she answered in Arabic, even haltingly, small privileges returned. The message became clear. The language of her childhood had no currency here. Only the present mattered. Only the new self being built mattered. After 3 months, Catherine was moved to a different facility, a household belonging to a mid-ranking administrative official who'd petitioned for an educated concubine to manage his domestic affairs and teach his children. She was presented to him with the same careful procedure used for evaluating any valuable acquisition. He inspected her knowledge of Arabic, her understanding of household management, her deportment. He asked her to read a passage from a religious text, then to explain its meaning. Finally, he asked her name. "Aisha," she said. The name Sophia had given her. The name she'd been instructed to use for 2 months until saying it felt less strange than Catherine. He nodded, satisfied, paid the required sum to the state treasury, led her to his household. What followed wasn't the harem fantasy of Orientalist paintings. It was domestic servitude with a veneer of status. Catherine, now Aisha, managed servants, supervised the education of the official's 3 children, maintained household accounts, and at night, fulfilled the other function for which she'd been acquired. She had her own room. She ate well. She wore quality clothing. By the standards of most enslaved people throughout history, her conditions were enviable. But everything she'd been was gone. Her father's fate remained unknown. Her mother had died during the initial siege. Her brother had been taken with the other boys, either killed or absorbed into military training. She'd never learn which. The church where she'd prayed as a child had been converted to a mosque. The neighborhood where she'd grown up had been repopulated with Muslim families. Every anchor to her previous identity had been systematically severed. And here's the terrible truth that sources from this period reveal. Within 5 years, most women, like Catherine, had adapted so completely that observers couldn't distinguish them from native-born members of Mamluk society. They spoke Arabic without accent. They practiced Islam with apparent devotion. They raised children who knew nothing of Christian heritage. The transformation the Mamluks engineered wasn't temporary compliance maintained by force. It was fundamental reconstitution of identity, achieved through procedures that combined psychological manipulation, social isolation, economic dependency, and generational erasure. Records from Damascus markets show that between 1260 and 1290, approximately 40,000 Christian women from Crusader territories and Armenian kingdoms were processed through Mamluk transformation facilities. Most ended up in military households as servants or concubines. Several thousand were classified as high-value acquisitions and placed in administrative or noble households. A few hundred possessed such exceptional education or skills that they entered the households of sultans and high-ranking emirs, where they sometimes achieved considerable influence within domestic spheres. But influence within a cage is still captivity, and the cost of survival was the annihilation of self. One source survives that hints at what this actually felt like from inside the experience. A letter, discovered in Cairo archives in the 19th century, written in Arabic by a woman who signed herself Maryam. Internal evidence suggests she was a former captive, educated, probably Frankish or Armenian, writing to another woman in a similar position. The letter is fragmentary, damaged by time and moisture, but certain passages remain legible. "I dream in their language now," she wrote. "When I wake, I cannot remember the prayers my mother taught me. I know they existed. I know I spoke them every night for 16 years. But the words are gone, replaced by words I once didn't know. My children will never learn what I've forgotten. They'll grow up believing this is all there ever was. And perhaps that's mercy. Perhaps forgetting is the only survival." She never mentions her previous name. Perhaps she'd forgotten it too. Perhaps she'd deliberately erased it, understanding that clinging to the past only made the present unbearable. Perhaps the transformation the Mamluks engineered was, in the end, something captive women collaborated in. Not because they chose it, but because choosing to become someone new was the only alternative to madness. This is what made the Mamluk system more devastating than massacre. Death ends suffering. What they built was a machine that perpetuated suffering while calling it integration, that destroyed identity while preserving bodies, that erased cultures while absorbing their children. And they refined this machine over 2 centuries, processing hundreds of thousands of captives with bureaucratic efficiency that would have impressed any modern state. 60 dinars. That's what remained of Catherine of Acre by the time the administrative machinery that had consumed her finished its calculation. Not a woman, not a story, not a self, just an item in an inventory, valued and transferred, the final documentation of what systematic transformation looked like when engineered by brilliant administrators who understood that human beings could be unmade and remade as efficiently as any other resource if you applied the right procedures with sufficient patience. They never called it atrocity. They called it integration.